Yeah.
I know I wanted to go into before we just go into the matchup on Florida. I know I wanted to go into DeBoer here for 1 minute. What did you guys make of his comments last night?
I think we got to talk about the actual decision before we talk about the
Oh
comments,
yeah,
right?
true.
Basically, the idea that Oettinger gets pulled after 2 shots go in, so Oilers are up 2-0 within 10 minutes of the game, not
Oh,
even.
Yeah.
it was like
5.
3 or 4.
I
Yeah.
know it was very early, and Ottinger's gone, and I remember looking at the TV like, oh
But
my
the
god,
thing was,
like,
it wasn't clear.
wait, what do you mean?
Like they called the timeout, right? He calls the timeout, and like Ottinger's they're skating away from the timeout, and Ottinger's going back to the net, and it wasn't clear until like Peter DeBoer just yells like, "Get out! You're
You're
out!
done.
You're done!" And like it just was not clear to anyone. Like no one on the broadcast, and no one even like thought it was happening until like when Jake Oettinger's skating down the tunnel, like, and Casey DeSmith seemed to be the only one knew that he was going into the net. Like, it was kind of crazy. Unless you guys like assumed like out of that timeout, like he was already being pulled. Like I don't know.
No,
What do you think,
I
Brandy?
thought that. I thought he was calling timeout. I thought it was a smart timeout at the moment.
I
Like
did
try to
too.
give your team a
Yeah.
chance. But yeah, I think there was like some miscommunication. Either Ottinger didn't hear him, maybe when he was dressing him, kind of at room, typical room volume, and then yeah, he tries to go back to the net, and then you see him turn around and come out, and it was an awkward situation for sure. And if I don't know if you guys saw, but on the TNT broadcast, they had Ray Ferraro in between the benches, and he was
Yeah.
stationed pretty much right beside Ottinger, and he was obviously tasked with breaking down what the situation was. And there were some photos circulating of Ottinger with his eyes closed, his head kind of down, and Ferraro right there, obviously speaking about him
Yeah.
and the challenges that he had. So it was definitely an awkward and difficult moment for the Otter, and for, I'm sure, DeBoer in that moment, trying to rack his brain in terms of what can I do to get my team back into this series when we're in the biggest hole you can pretty much have. So yeah, it was one of those things. But then the conversation, I feel like, switched. Dallas gets back into the game a little bit, and at least again on the TNT broadcast, which I was watching, they continued to ask the question of would you put Ottinger back in, and I think that's a natural
Like in game
question
6 or during the game.
during the game. Like, would you put
Oh.
him back in at 3-2 going into the third period? Should they had kept that deficit, or if they get it back to, obviously it was 4-2 going into the third, but they score that early goal. It's like, well, what do you like? You're at this point where you can't give up another goal in your season,
Yeah.
and then they do. And I know it wasn't necessarily. I wouldn't put
Smith.
any of those, the McDavid goal or the goal in the third period that bounced off his own defender's skate. Like, realistically, there's not much you can do about that. But it is interesting to think, like, if Oettinger stays in that game, does he keep it to 4 goals? And then, your team's right there. So it's just one of those crazy things. But Justin, you go ahead with the post-game comments, because I know they were definitely interesting as well. It didn't feel like he was doing his own squad any favors there.
Yeah, well, we assume we'll take. We talked about Rod Brindamore yesterday, talking about maybe not, or like would he get fired? I don't think so. I think Peter DeBoer is
Right.
probably on bigger of a hot seat than he is, and especially after last night's comments, he wasted no time going after his team in that loss. Like no time at all. Threw his number one goalie under the bus. By a quote that was pretty damning in the moment, and it just has stuck with everyone in, I guess, the hockey world in like the last 12 hours, because that was the quote of the night for sure. It was, I didn't blame it all on Jake, but the reality is, if you go back to last year's playoffs, he's lost 6 of 7 games to Edmonton, and we give up 2 goals on 2 shots in an elimination game. That's a pretty big sample size. That's a pretty damning and strong quote from Peter DeBoer, and it did not stop there on the night. There was another quote where he was asked, like, did you think that you guys were the better team? And he's like, no, the 2 better teams are playing in the Stanley Cup final right now. We were not the better team at all. Edmonton was the better team. Just basically taking shots at his own team right after a Game 5 loss, has the option basically to defend them, not like throw them. like say like yes, Edmonton was the better team, but we fought hard. We didn't like give up. Like has the option to do that. No, no, no. He went right at his team and let them know in the media basically that he was not happy, especially with Jake Oettinger. And I don't know how you repair that relationship now going forward if you're the Dallas Stars and Jake Oettinger. And Jake Ottinger's not leaving, right? He just signed a massive extension. So maybe it's DeBoer.
Well, but I do think it's fair to question, not necessarily in that moment, and then maybe not from that specific mouth, but I think that there is now, with the way that this Dallas core and group has continued to kind of flame out in these big moments, it is worth asking the question of whether or not is it the roster itself, is it just the coach, or maybe Ottinger's not built for these moments. I know Justin a couple weeks back you had him penciled in, it seemed like, at the Olympics for the US, but at this point, like, you don't really know. It feels like what he is in those big moments. He's clearly a great regular season goalie, and has had some great moments in early rounds of the playoffs, but you get to a conference final 2 years in a row and he's outplayed by Stuart Skinner in both of those series. So that is disappointing, and it only takes one great series in a conference final or a Stanley Cup final to cement yourself as a playoff player, but he's yet to do that. So I think whether you want to look at the group up front, obviously there's a bit of an aging core, not necessarily core there, but some of their older players have been around for a long time and have yet to kind of break through with this group. So
you gotta feel for Jamie Benn.
Yeah, Jamie Benn, Tyler Seguin, these kind of guys who have been there and helped bring along this new group of guys, but haven't really been the reason or been part of the reason why they've been able to break through into a cup final. I think they did make a cup final way back
2020.
Dallas, Tampa.
And they lost right before
6 games, I believe.
So they've been there. I think they've just haven't done themselves any favors in terms of creating any kind of long-term success or belief that they can get back there. So I mean, early going into the playoffs, I had them as a team to make the Stanley Cup final. I really thought this was the year that they were going to break through. But I don't think anybody going into the playoffs saw, first off, the switch, it seems like, flip for Edmonton, and that they get healthy and they've gone on a complete roll since losing those first 2 games in LA. It's just been a completely different team. And then Dallas, it seemed like they were going the other way, where they had they were kind of getting guys back, but you could tell they weren't 100%, and they were kind of almost taking steps backwards because they were maybe disrupting the group that had got them through the first round, or trying to change their style to allow other players that were coming back, like Heiskanen and Robertson, to kind of try to find their game in the playoffs, which is a tough thing to do. So I think once they got up against a team like Edmonton, who was just rolling, it's going to be tough to knock that down.
Yeah. With Oettinger, you talk about, Brandon, how, especially as a goalie, you can cement yourself as like a playoff performer really within a couple of series. I think it's the exact same as if you were to perform poorly. You at least see Connor Hellebuck, who we discussed earlier this year. It only really takes 2 back-to-back poor performances in the playoffs for people to start questioning your ability to play in big pressure moments. Now, I'm not saying Jake Ottinger's there, but I pulled up his stats this morning because I knew that this would be a conversation. And in the Western Conference Finals, he's been there as the main goalie of record for 3 straight years. Right. And he has a 5-11 record with a 3.29 goals against average and a save percentage of below 900. It's actually 881. So there's a couple games where he's been pulled, right, or he's come in relief, but not ideal. And still a very young kid, but he is a guy who's obviously the number 1 goalie by far. It was weird last night. I feel like if you let in maybe a third goal, things change. Like if there's 3 goals in the first period, which ended up happening, obviously the third one with Casey DeSmith, but maybe the third goal is when you make that change. It was a really short leash, but maybe DeBoer had a conversation with Otter before, being like, hey man, like we need this. And if you're not feeling it early, maybe we have to go that route. It didn't seem that way, the way you can see Jake like just upset. And I would be too, if you're that, you're tasked with holding the fort down, and immediately the floodgates open. I mean, I'm not surprised Edmonton won. I'm surprised, like I said earlier, in the fashion that it took place, where it just seemed like Dallas didn't have their legs the entire night until they were really back against the wall. And at that point, it's like it's like the Leafs with Florida. They gave way less of a fight, but they fought back very minimally when they were down like 5-0. In this case, it was closer, but the game was pretty much out of reach, for the most part.